Boker Tov, welcome. And we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu, melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. We are already on to the second Parsha of Vayikra, and that is Seder Tzav. And this morning, my thought is to look at both Rashi and Torah Temimah. There's a Torah Temimah that explains a Rashi, I think, very nicely. So, but we will look at whatever we can cover this morning. So, starting off, Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, a much more common expression than what we started with.
Surprisingly, no Rashi on that.
Yes, right. Unsurprisingly, yes. If you don't want to speak ironically, right? Hashem spoke to Moses to say, right? Or saying.
Quote.
Yes, exactly. That's Rabbi Barmash's translation. Tzav et Aharon, command Aaron, ve'et banav lemor, and his children, his sons, saying, Zot Torat ha'olah. This is the Torah of the Olah sacrifice. So we can translate Torah as instruction. I think that is actually a nice translation, is to understand, Torah as instruction. And of course, when we talk about the Torah, we talk about divine instruction. And by the way, a great secret to life is following instructions. It is amazing what happens when you do that. And yet we have like a human, it seems to me, maybe it's a male thing more than a female thing, if I want to be gender oriented, not to follow instructions, for men not to follow instructions. So the fact that it's counterintuitive makes it even more important. Okay. Hi ha'olah, this is the olah, al mokdah, on its pyre, Pyre, al hamizbeach, on the altar, kol halayla ad haboker, the entire night until morning. Ve'esh hamizbeach, and the fire on the altar to kadbo will be lit on it. It'll be aflame all night. So this is not a sentence. I mean, it's whether it's Hebrew or it's English, it just, it's a bunch of ideas which we are going to have to parse out and see what are they talking about. So it certainly doesn't feel to me like flowing Hebrew. Tzav et Aharon. It's the very first word, Tzav. And this stands for Torat Kohanim. This is a halachic midrash on the book of Leviticus. Ein Tzav, the only understanding we have of Tzav, or let's say that what we have to focus on when it comes to the word Tzav, Ela Lashon Ziruz, has the connotation of encouragement or insistence or alacrity. In other words, there's a certain urging that comes with this word Tzav. Miyad v'ledorot, now and in future generations. That's what the word Tzav, when you say command, it has that connotation associated with it. Amar Rabbi Shimon, said Rabbi Shimon, Beyoter, even more so, Tzarich Chatuv Lazares, there is the situation where scripture has to urge b'makom sheyesh bo chesron kis, in a situation where there is pecuniary loss, monetary loss. And of course, if you are puzzled, then you're paying attention. So we're going to look at the Torah Temimah on this, because he says exactly the same thing here. And in his commentary, here is where Torat Kohanim, see the same quotation place. He quotes directly from it. Ein Tzav Ela Ziruz. Tzav essentially means urging. Miyad Veladorot, immediately and in future generations. Amar Rabbi Shimon, said Rabbi Shimon, Beyoter, all the more so, B'makom sheyesh chesron kis, where there is a loss of money. What are we talking about? Here we go. Here's the Torah Temimah.
I just injected in modern Hebrew when they talk about a ziruz in certain contexts, it means a shot of Pitocin to a woman in labor.
Say this again, I'm sorry?
Ziruz is used to mean if a woman's labor is stuck and not progressing, they'll give some Pitocin or whatever that hormone is that hastens the labor. And they call it a ziruz.
That's interesting.
Yeah. To urging it along, yes.
Yeah. With alacrity.
Or encouragement, maybe. Ziruz could also mean encouragement, but definitely has more of the sense of urging. The Rabbi Shimon, okay, so here we go. Yitachen lomar, when in analyzing this, right? Because this is what happens, is we watch this analysis that goes into this so much deeper and gives us a better sense of what's going on here. And that's what I love about this stuff, right? I mean, without this, I certainly know, I would never come up with this sort of stuff, right? It appears that one can say, the Tana Kama, that the first anonymous opinion that said that it has to do with ziruz, right? Mikan v'ledorot, now and in future generations. The Tana Kama v'Rabbi Shimon, this is with reference to that anonymous opinion and then subsequently followed by Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Daiku, they were looking carefully, Ma Sheshina HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in that the Holy One, blessed be He, changed his normal way of saying things. Lomar kan b'lashon tzav, that here he uses the language of tzav. He uses this term tzav. In other words, why dafka tzav? What is it coming to really tell us? And that's what they're telling us, right? That's what they're saying. V'lo kamo b'chol parshiot korbanot, and not like all the other sections that have to do with the sacrifices, but Parsha Vayikra, in that previous Parsha of Vayikra, uva Parsha zo, and in this Parsha, Sheitchil be'inyan hamitzvah, when it starts off with the talking about the specific mitzvah that it wants to tell us. It doesn't use the term tzav. So why here? Why dafka here? Umefaresh Tanakama, and so the Tanakama explained, Mishum, why? Because Dahacha Maire Be'olat Tamid. Because here it's teaching about Olat Tamid, the perpetual Olah. This is the Olah that was brought twice a day. In other words, it's talking about the Olah, and we know that there are a number of situations where an Olah is brought. But here, in this particular Parsha, in this particular little instruction, it's talking about a specific Olah, and that is the lamb that was brought in the morning and the lamb that was brought in the evening. And by the way, that corresponds to our Shacharit and our Mincha services nowadays. That when we daven Shachrit and Mincha, it isn't because, that just happens to be a good time. It's because it specifically comes to replace, because we cannot offer it up in the temple. In actuality, that's why we do Shachrit and Mincha. V'lachen shayach, and for this reason, letzavot al ziruz miyad, and that's why there is a need to command regarding alacrity immediately, because it's every single day. V'lo kamo b'sha'ar korbanot, and not like other sacrifices, sheyesh bahem korbanot mitnadvin, because in that case there are those sacrifices. And by the way, translating korban as sacrifice is so tough in some ways, because sacrifice has one connotation and a korban has another connotation entirely, which has to do with drawing close. So when I did some more research, I had mentioned this connection of korban to the word kiruv. It has to do with tightening that connection that we seek with the eternal. So there are other sacrifices, mitnadvim. There are those sacrifices which are free will offerings. I wanted to make a donation. I wanted to bring a sacrifice. And there are sacrifices that you can bring that are voluntary. The korbanot chotim. However, there are also other sacrifices which are chatats, they are sin offerings. You can't voluntarily bring a sin offering. You bring a sin offering because you are obligated or you have that opportunity to gain atonement through the sin offering. Shelo shayach litzavot, because it doesn't make sense to command al ziruz miyad, that they need to be done immediately. Deshema lo yu mitmadvim, because it's possible that there won't be people who are offering. It's dependent on circumstance. Maybe there won't be people who are offering, who are just volunteering their offerings or want to donate donations. V'chotim l'sha'ah, that at that particular moment there are no people who are sinning. We don't know. But Rabbi Shimon mefaresh, and Rabbi Shimon comes to explain, tzarich letzavot kan ala ziruz, that one needs to command here regarding regarding alacrity. Mishum de kevan, on account de kevan de ire beolat tamid. Again, since it's dealing with the tamid offering, the tamid olah, v'yesh bazeh chesron kisla kohanim, and regarding kohanim, there is monetary loss, there's pecuniary loss, she'einam zochim mibesara, because they are not entitled to any of its flesh, any of its meat. Kamo misha'ar korbanot, like other offerings, the olah kula kalil, because an olah is completely sacrificed. Not all the parts of the olah go up on the altar, but a lot more. In other words, essentially, whatever doesn't go up on the altar is burned off in a sacred area. And because they don't gain anything personal from bringing this offering, they may be a little bit less inclined to do a good job. And for this reason, it purposely comes to say, you need to do this. It comes to urge them. Okay, now just to tell you that there was some benefit to the Kohanim, but maybe not from this offering. And this offering, by the way, generally in Olah, the priest was given the hide of the offering, and that was it, but certainly nothing to personally consume. And this, of course, is a public offering. Incidentally, it's not an individual offering. So there may be some question. I imagine, though, that the mishmar, that is the particular watch, there were, I believe, 24 priestly watches. Each took 2 weeks, apparently, a week at a time in the temple by rotation. And the priests of their family that was in charge of that particular mishmar would get the hide or the benefit of that offering. However, these are all complicated subjects. At any rate, we're getting the point here. Okay, but so now we on to something else. Uma, before we move on, because we're obviously onto a now new point, and if somebody has something they want to say, please feel free. All right, silence implies consent. Uma de lo nechale le Rabbi Shimon beta'ama de Tanakama. And now Baruch Halevi Epstein goes into a deeper level of understanding of why the need for two explanations. We've got two separate explanations. And Necha Leila Rabbi Shimon means Rabbi Shimon is not satisfied, but Tama de Tanakama, with the explanation of the Tanakama. Yesh lomar, one could say, de pligi beplugta, that he in fact is disagreeing with them in the disagreement, the Rabbi Elazar, between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Akiva. In other words, there is this dispute, which is going to be explained in a moment, between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Akiva. There's this, it's not a debate necessarily here. It just simply says they have a difference of opinion regarding an explanation or an interpretation. All right. And that Rabbi Shimon is going to hold like one of those people, and the Tanakama may be holding like the other side. So it's comparing the argument of the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon to the argument between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Akiva bechagiga in the tractate Chagiga Vav, page 6, side 2. Here we go. The Rabbi Eliezer Svarle, that Rabbi Eliezer, in this particular discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, Svarle, he holds the Olat Tamid, that the perpetual offering, the Tamid Olah, Hanemara Parsha Zo, that is referred to in this particular Parsha, Lo Haita Kreva Bamidbar, wasn't actually brought in the desert. So he's not, so that's important to know. Mishum de Yisrael nizafim hayu, because the Jewish people were at this point, so nizafim mean it has to do with the fact that, that they were in a bad place. Okay. I can't think of the exact way to translate nizufim, but it means basically that God was not happy with them.
Okay, they were in the doghouse?
Yes, they were. Okay, we can use that one. All right. Hayu bima'aseh ha'egel, on account of the golden calf. So they were not in a good place. V'lo hikrivu uta rak bevo'am ba'aretz. So Rabbi Eliezer says the sacrifices weren't being brought in the wilderness, certainly not the Tamid offering, and they brought it only when they came to Israel. So he hold on to that, right? So they may have brought other offerings to get the tabernacle in place, but the idea specifically of the Olat Tamid, this daily offering of the lamb in the morning and the lamb in the afternoon, didn't happen until they entered Eretz Yisrael. Okay. But Rabbi Akiva holds to Kreva Haita B'Midbar, that they did in fact bring the offering of the Olah in the desert, in the wilderness. Ye'uyan Sham V-Day. Check it out. Check out Chagiga, page 6b. Ulefize, and so according to this, Yesh Lomar, one can say, the Tanakama Savar le Rabbi Akiva, that the Tanakama holds like Rabbi Akiva. In other words, since they were bringing the offering in the desert, that's why Ziruz Miyad Ledorot, immediately and future generations, make sense. That's the reason. Shayach lidrosh kavanat hatzivui. He's going to spell this out the way I just did. And for this reason, it makes sense to interpret the intention of this commandment, miyad v'ladorot, now and future generations. For Rabbi Shimon Savarle, and Rabbi Shimon holds Rabbi Eliezer or Elazar. He holds like, I think it's Rabbi Elazar. He holds like Rabbi Elazar. The lo haita kreva klal olat tamid bamidbar, that there was no instance of the tamid being offered in the wilderness. The imkain, and if this is the case, lo shayach hatzivu miyad v'ladorot. So consequently, saying now and future generations doesn't make sense. V'lachen darish hatam mishum sheyesh bo chesron kis, and that's why he comes up with the rationale being that there is pecuniary loss. Kemavuar has been explained. I mean, my own reaction to this is wow. Right? I mean, we looked at the original sentence, we looked at Rashi's interpretation, and we look at this peeling away the layers onto this kind of level. And in the amount of scholarship that is involved in knowing these various references that are all over they're all over the ocean, okay? And it's like a grand detective work, noticing things that most people just don't even pay attention to. Okay.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. If it's a chisron kis, that means it's a financial loss to the Kohanim.
Yes, and that's why they need to be urged.
But wouldn't that apply? How does that mean? That would apply at all times, in the desert, after the desert, wouldn't it?
True.
Wouldn't that
case all? Yes, it would. It would. However, he's suggesting that isn't the main reason. That if they didn't have to bring it in the desert, like Rabbi Akiva holds, the argument of chesron kis doesn't apply. Okay, Rabbi Akiva says they did bring it in the desert. Okay, sorry, let me make sure I'm holding this properly. Right, Rabbi Akiva says they did bring in the desert, and yes, but in the case of the desert, the Tanna Kama is going to say what's most important is they have to get going to do this, and you could say that Rabbi Shimon is simply adding another dimension to it. But the fact that they had to bring it was the idea that they had to do it immediately. Is this making some sense?
So are we assuming that this is happening before the golden calf or after the golden calf?
No. It's after the golden calf.
Is it after the spies?
No, it's
because
not.
It can't be after the spies. So
No,
it's got to be before the spies.
The spies, yes, correct.
Okay.
If you're going to hold that they were like Rabbi Akiva, that they were bringing offerings in the desert.
Right. So if it wasn't until after the 38 years of oops, I don't know you're there, it could be where there's trees, because I'm wondering where all this wood is coming from.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, okay,
a lot of wood.
But the desert isn't just.
No, I know it's a wilderness, but still,
yeah. There's shrubbery, there's trees, and they go and they collect it, But that, yeah.
It's just a lot of food is being used. A lot of
there's manna. They're getting manna.
Right.
They have their flocks. They do, and they're going to various encampments. I mean, how would they survive at all in that area if there wasn't some kind of oases and supplies for them to survive? I mean,
correct.
You can go back to the very basis of this, but working with Shira Beth's argument, the fact that the Tanna Kama is saying that the main concern is the fact that it starts right away, right? That you want it to start immediately, and that's why the urging has to take place, because of a natural inclination to procrastinate. But I'm sure you guys have no idea what I'm talking about.
As my taxes are kind of all sprawled all over the
And you could say that Rabbi Shimon, that we're not talking about a complete machloket, but that Rabbi Shimon feels that there is a need to emphasize that, if that's the case.
A lot of people believe, maybe wrongfully, that the only thing they subsisted on all that time was manna.
Okay.
And I mean, that's the idea that we're kind of ingrained with as children. And I think it's also more Christian that they push that, and that's all they ate.
Well, I think there is some good reason to say that. There's some good reason to say that and to support that particular position. I don't know if that would include their needs for liquid. Maybe there was enough liquid in or fluids in the manna to sustain them that way as well. But the whole idea, of course, is that statement, I believe, that wants to suggest that that ultimately all food comes from a divine source. There's a wonderful, I just finished reading it. I'm reading it on Saturday nights. Just finished reading, there's an art scroll, Birkat Hamazon. There's a little booklet that they have simply on Birkat Hamazon. And there's a wonderful overview by Nosson Sherman where he talks about the manna. And he talks about the relationship of saying Birkat Hamazon to the manna, which makes total sense, at least to me it does, where he's saying basically that the lesson of the manna is really to let us know that as much as human effort is involved, and there's an incredible amount of human effort involved in the preparation of food and the whole food chain, etc., that nevertheless, to never, ever forget that ultimately it comes through God's hand.
So whether God was speaking to them or not, those 38 years, we're still providing for them.
Correct. Good point.
Okay.
Good point.
All
right. But again, just Shira Beth, are you more comfortable with this position? I mean, I think your analysis is wonderful.
Well, it was more a confusion than an analysis. It's just, I guess the Tanakhama, or the two ideas were the Tzav was necessary because there might not be any other sacrifices. It might be the only one of the day or of the morning.
Yeah.
And the second one was
right. That it was
not going to get any benefit from it.
Yes.
Pardon,
sorry. No. Yes. The first thing is dependent on the fact that no matter what, it was compulsory. It was a compulsory sacrifice.
So it was, and it wasn't any particular occasion. It was just daily.
Correct.
So that required some urging.
Right. That Shabbos, Yom Kippur, doesn't matter. We read in let's see, I'm trying to think of the Parsha where we read, is it, I'm trying to think where, Pinchas, in Parshat Pinchas, where we read about the specific sacrifices for every, in the book of Numbers, for every day and month, etc. Right? The Musafim were just additional sacrifices on top of the Tamid. The Tamid was day in, day out.
So that day in, day outness meant that there was a need for extra urging.
Correct.
And the other idea is actually there was a need for extra urging because the Kohanim didn't benefit personally from this meat.
Correct. They had to do all the work and they didn't get paid for it.
And they spent the kesef, they spent the silver to get the.
No. That had to.
Or they had their own flock. They had their own flock.
No. This goes back to Kitisa. Remember where there was the silver that they collected.
That's what I'm saying. And that it went from that silver to pay for.
Yeah, but the shekel came from the entire community.
Right. No, I understand that. But it's going down.
Yeah, but it's not their personal money.
Right. No, it's not their personal.
It's collected for that very purpose.
Right.
So no, that was not the Chesron Kis. It's very important that Torah Temimah explains the nature of the Chesron Kis, because Rashi doesn't explain what the Chesron Kis was, what the monetary loss was.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So here we go. Zot Torat Ha'olah. This is the instruction regarding the Olah, etc. Harei ha'inyan hazeh ba. In this, what we're going to be talking about, this inyan, this subject, right? Ba lilmod, comes to teach al hekter chalavim ve'evarim, regarding the burning off of the fats and the limbs, shehe kasher kol halayla, to let you know that they were kasher for the entire night. Now, this whole issue of how long you can put how long the sacrifice is still operative and kasher is an important issue, and different offerings could be consumed for a different amount of time, and if they weren't consumed in the proper time, it rendered invalid the entire offering. So the fact that the Torah is coming to say that it is okay to burn off the fats and the limbs of the sacrifice that are supposed to go, I think they're talking about the ones that went on the altar, but then basically the fats and those limbs, well, the olah, that would be in fact burnt on the altar. I believe that just the legs of the sacrifice, and I imagine the skin and possibly the innards were burnt elsewhere and not on the altar. But essentially, most of the animals, certainly the flesh and the rest of the limbs, were burned off on the altar. V'lelamed al hapsulim, and here's the thing, and to teach regarding those offerings that became pasul, which were no longer effective to serve as offerings. And this is something that has to be defined carefully as to what psulim we're talking about, and there's discussion about that in the Torah Temimah, etc. Eza im Allah yered, which one of those psulim are such that if it was taken up onto the altar, put up on the altar, yered, it had to be removed. The Eza im Allah lo yered, and those psulim, sacrifices that were no longer, for whatever reason, some pasul, some element that rendered invalid, if it was put up on the altar, lo yered, should not come down, should not be removed. Shekol Torah, because when he's saying when the word Torah is used, right? When this word instruction is used, lerabot hu ba, okay, it comes to tell you additional information. It comes to include other situations. Lomar Torah achat lechol ha'olim, to tell you that there is one instruction regarding all the olot, right? All those things that are brought up on the altar. Va'afilu psulim, and to include those certain psulim that he's referring to, she'im alu lo yerdu, that if those psulim were brought up onto the altar, they do not have to be removed. And understand that this is a very sacred act, an incredibly sacred act that is taking place, to place this material on the altar, to place these parts on the altar as an act of sacrifice. Remember, it has to do with trying to draw very close to the creator of the universe. So there will be further, again, understanding that we are only touching chapter headings here. Hu ha'olah, this is the olah. So this, right, comes to lema'et, right? This comes to exclude et harovea, an animal that committed a sexual act with a human being, the et hanirba, and a female animal with whom a sexual act was committed, ukiyotse bahem, and likewise other kinds of these kinds of psulim. Shelo haya psulan bakodesh. Why? Because when they became pasul, when they became not, they could rendered invalid, when they became invalid. Shelo hayu psulan bakodesh. They did not become invalid after the animal had been, and when the process of sacrifice took place. Okay.
Rabbi, it's 4 minutes after.
Oh no, I had no idea. Okay, we'll have to stop. All right, thank you for telling me. I will stop the share and stop the recording. Thank you.